2 in our Unit 513 self-awareness. Before we move into this session, I just want to do a quick recap on what we covered in session 1. So we looked at and considered the behaviours and the impacts of our behaviours, things like our triggers, Batari's box, attitude and behaviour. We looked at emotional intelligence, unconscious bias, implicit association tests, and then we moved on to psychometrics and management tools that we can use for feedback, and we finished on the impacts of self-awareness for us and for others. Now we're going to consider 3 areas that we can use as part of our self-awareness, the first being learning styles. Learning styles theories work on the principle that we all learn differently, and that's based on individual characteristics and preferences, but it's important that we consider these in the workplace as staff need training and development, and they may all learn in different ways. We'll then in part 2 look at behavioural styles and working styles. I think more than ever in the modern workplace today, it's key that we're there to empower employees and improve organisational effectiveness. The more people work as a team, I think the more it becomes key to them, or they recognise that they have different styles and behaviours to different people, and getting over that is part of becoming a team. The way we see and deal with people's behaviours is important, as we discussed in emotional intelligence, and we'll examine some theories behind that, and then we'll move on to working styles, and it will just be a quick overview on that, because later on in your qualification you'll be asked to consider the impacts and make adjustments to your learning styles. So we'll get you to do a working styles questionnaire there and make some notes, and you can use that more moving forward. Right then, so let's have a look at the objectives. So the aims for this second session are to understand different learning and behavioural styles, and to understand how to reflect on your own working style. By the end of this session, you should be able to evaluate different learning styles and their implications for learning and development in the workplace, assess different behavioural styles and their implications in the workplace, and evaluate your own working style and its impact on others. So let's get started. So we've briefly outlined what a learning theory is, but the term learning styles generally refers to a competing or contesting theory that aims to account for the differences in the way people learn. Later on in an activity at the end of this unit, you'll be asked to evaluate some different theories on learning styles, but all these theories propose that we can be classified into a style according to the way we learn, and they have different sort of approaches to the way they think we can be classified and how we can define or categorize our learning style, and they all have merits, and we'll review 4 of them, but they're all sort of based on Kolb's learning or reflective style, and we'll look at that in a second. But we're going to look at Vark, we're going to look at Honey and Mumford, we'll look at Gardner's multiple intelligences, we'll look at Fielder Silverman. So let's quickly just look at Kolb's reflective cycle. Briefly mentioned when we just started talking about that we'll be looking at some different learning style theories. I mentioned Kolb's reflective cycle. I just want to make sure everyone understands that. So it's a cycle of reflection that shows how we learn and evolve things that we're doing, really. And it talks about we experience something new, so we might learn something new, we reflect on it, and we look at the impact it might have on us. We conceptualize it and sort of think about it in our environment, how it might work for us, and then we try these things out, we try it out and we experience it again. So I just wanted that to be clear before we start talking about it, because I might mention it as we're going through a couple of things. So let's have a look at some learning style theories. We'll start with one of the more commonly used ones, and probably one of the simplest or most basic ones, but very effective, and that's Vark. You'll get to do one later in the activity, and you can also get a colleague, a team member to do one so that you can compare them. More on that later. But it's a set of simplistic questions in the questionnaire which, after you've given answers, help to categorise you into one of the 4 preferred learning styles. I say preferred because it doesn't mean that's the only way you can learn, and it doesn't mean that that is that you can't use the other ways in conjunction with it. But let's have a quick look at what Vark stands for. Firstly, it's not complicated because there's no codes. It's just Vark stands for visual, oral, read, write, and kinesthetic. And they're simply the categories. They say that visual learners like to see things, they watch, they like graphical representations, whereas oral audio learners like to listen and be told things. Read-write learners like to read, research, write notes and do assignments, and kinesthetic learners are tactile in their learning style. They like to learn carrying out physical activities rather than listening, lecturing or watching demonstrations. So in VARC we had 4 categories: visual, oral, read and write and kinesthetic. And the next one we look at is Honey and Mumford, which is a well-recognised learning style theory model, inspired and built upon Kolb's reflective that we talked about. They produced their own learning styles and categories questionnaire, and we'll look at that now. So their first was activists. Activists like to learn by doing. They like to get their hands dirty, have a go. They deal with getting involved directly without any fears of new concept ideas, and they sort of embrace the challenge. They like activities such as brainstorming, problem solving, getting involved in group discussions, puzzles and competitions, even enjoy role play, and they would be happy to just pick something up and have a go. So you might send someone who is an activist off to do something for the first time and just let them have a go and learn by doing and let you know how it went. The second, theorists, like to have all the information to hand so they can be fully embraced in the theory, fully comprehend what goes on behind the activities before they even have a go. They're most comfortable if they're given models, ideas, details about the end goal before they even start to participate in something. They like to fully understand how it works, what the possibilities are, how it could come together before they even have a go at it. So you might want, with that sort of person, to talk them through it, let them go away and read and reflect on it. Then they might do a little bit of the conceptualization and see how it would fit into how they might work before they would then be comfortable to have a go. Pragmatists, on the other hand, need to know from the beginning how that learning is going to be applied in reality. Conceptual theories, ideas, experimenting with new ideas or speculation is something that they need time to take on board. They learn best through having that time, but they want to know how it's going to be applied, how it's going to be put into practice. Case studies, problem solving and discussions around what they actually do could be beneficial in getting new ideas across to them. Final category was reflectors. They like to stand back, watch, contemplate what's happening. They prefer to remain in the background, let others have a go whilst they watch from the sidelines, but they are considering what's happening, considering the various points and gathering information to come to a conclusion. They like discussions, but preferably in small groups, self-analysing, time to reflect and consider, observing demonstrations, getting feedback and views from others, from things like coaching, etc. And we don't all fit into one of these categories, so we might be a mix of things. And they also gave us, Honey and Mumford, they also gave us some categories which are coming up around the outside now, which talked about the types of learning. So active experimentation, about planning. People who learn like that like to plan how to test things out, how they're going to go about using those models. So it's go away and plan it before having a go, so they might have a case study. Reflective observation, where people watch. They like to reflect on the experiences, think about those practices and how they might put them into their context and how they might use them. So they might like to possibly use some simulation, some role plays and reflect on how it went before they put it into practice. Then there's people who learn from a concrete experience at the top there, people who actively like doing the sort of, or you might say field work or doing the task under supervision. So that might be that person you say to, right, I want you to go to something, just have a go, let me know how it goes, and then we'll build on that experience when you come back. And then finally in there we've got abstract conceptualization, so it's about thinking. They like to observe a model or a theory, see something, then explain what they might do with it. So you might have them watching videos, reading processes, and then explaining how they might go about using what they've been learning. Now, Gardner's intelligences theory is another theory altogether. He was working on the process, he was a psychologist, and he was working on the process of intelligences, and he said that people had different intelligences, not one. He said they were linguistic, logical, mathematical, musical, bodily kinesthetic, spatial, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and naturalist. He said that learning styles were more about the ways in which people approach tasks, whereas these are about the intelligences they have and their preference to an intelligence. However, educators who were struggling to put people into the categories or the styles of the other learning styles have quite often used these, and they developed a concept of learning styles from these. And bodily kinesthetic is an intelligence that entails using one's own body to create products or to solve problems. So these people are like physical experiences, basically, is what the principal was saying. Interpersonal reflects the ability to recognize or understand other people's moods, desires, motivations. So these people like to learn with people where there's lots of interaction and they can use that intelligence. Verbally linguistic refers to people's ability to analyze information and produce work in an oral or written form. So they like to be involved in things where there's speeches going on, where they've got to use books or they've got to write something so that they can use their intelligence. Logical mathematic describes people with a skill for equations, proofs, calculations, and solving abstract problems. So they're going to like to work with patterns, asking questions, experimenting, making connections. Naturalistic is about people who have a different feeling and connection to animals, plants, weather formations. So they like to learn hands-on experimenting. They like to be outside and getting involved with different parts of nature. Intrapersonal was talking about people's ability to recognize and assess the abilities of others. So they learn best doing things independently and researching their own stuff. Visual spatial was about comprehending things such, and they like, well, maps, graphs. They like to be able to use their spatial awareness, so those sort of things fit with their style. And then musical are people who have a predisposition to musical notes and sounds, so they like to learn things by song, they like to be involved in music, and there were quite often people who would like to listen to music while they're doing learning. And a strange mix of things, but we can see how you can start to individualize for each person, although on the learning style sort of angle it is a slightly different theory. So Gardner's intelligence theory, a little bit more complicated, and I find quite confusing as to actually defining a learning style. Felder and Silverman came up with 4 dimensions, and I think sometimes you could say that they're sort of mixing some of the ones we've had before, but they had 4 dimensions, and they were active or reflective, visual or verbal, sensing or intuitive, and sequential or global. And basically they talked about distinguishing which you were in each of the dimensions. So distinguishing between active and a reflective learner, according to them, we all have periods of being active learners and of being reflective learners. Most people lean towards being active learners. The most people like classroom environments where there's a help and a process where they get information. But reflective learners can feel overwhelmed by those sort of activities or group projects. So they get better involved working individually and being able to take time, as we've said, reflective about thinking about things, whereas the active learners want to get involved and get on with things. So you're either active or reflective or a mixture of the two. Visual and verbal is just about the difference between how you use the information that you get from the instructions. So visual people like to look at things, verbal people like to hear things, and they also indicated they believe that most people have a tendency towards visual learning. I think what they were saying was that even if you're a verbal learner, you do like some sort of pictures or something to back it up. They then asked to think about whether you're a sensing or an intuitive learner. Sensing, more concrete like facts. Abstract, sort of more happy with theoretical or conceptual ideas. So the Sensing learners prefer solving problems, working out the facts, the formulas, seeing if things fit together, and they would lean towards things that happen in the real world and not getting too conceptual, whereas the intuitive learner is prepared to look at innovation, novelty, abstract ideas, hypothetical situations, and try and get involved in that and try and think about how they might be able to use those. And then finally, sequential and global was all about the way you like things organized, how you like to progress things and move forward. Sequential people, as it says, sequential, like small steps, take one step, then move to the next, then move to the next. And the global learners like the big leap, straight into the big idea, and then possibly work back from that. But the sequential learner wouldn't like that. They like to have each stage as it comes and know what comes first, what comes second, where global are quite happy to be hit with a big idea and then start to break it down. So lots of thoughts in there. That one links back very much to some of the Vark and the Honey and Mumford, and I think the Gardener's intelligence one stands out a little on its own. But I think the whole process is, overall, it's just understanding that there are many different people out there, and we need to individualize for ourselves and think about how we best learn, and also about how we do that with the people in our workforce. So we'll start having a look in the next slide about how we address or consider those things. So we briefly looked at 4 learning styles, theories, ideas, and there's more out there. And when you come to your assignment, I'm sure you need to do a bit further research. They're not universally accepted theories and ideas. People have different opinions about them. And there's a need to understand their sort of limitations and strengths in the context you're going to use them, whether it be as an individual or as an organisation. There's some more in the resources, but just as an overall, there's a criticism sometimes about they can be limiting or incorrect. And if you, in the activity, there's a speaker or you can watch a video who will go through that in a bit more detail. But they can also sometimes be seen as the defining answer. It's as if they're the only thing, learning styles. Oh, you are an audio learner, you are a kinesthetic learner. And we've got to make sure they're not the definitive answer, because individuals can get pigeonholed by themselves. They can use it as an excuse, say, oh, well, I didn't learn that very well because I'm a visual learner and it wasn't visual. Or they can be used as an excuse by organisational trainers to say, oh, that's because of this, that's because of that. So we've got to be careful of that. We can focus on them sometimes rather than the objective of the training, getting the training right. So people spend so much time thinking about the learning styles that they forget about the main objectives of the training. But they can be useful to examine or define effective learning and development. What I mean by that is, we can look at them and think, well, that'll be good for visual, that's good for, so we're incorporating all of them into it. And they can be good for people as an awareness of themselves. And we're talking about self-awareness, about knowing what their preferences are. And again, the speaker will outline more about preferences and learning styles when you do your activity. So what's the activity? So for this activity, there's a couple of things I want you to do. I want you to watch the video to get a different perspective on learning styles and what someone else thinks, because it's not a specific science and it's not defined as definite. I want you to read the article. There's a PDF in the resources, The Case Against Learning Styles. You can do the free Vark questionnaire, and there's some Vark guidance, so that's one of the learning styles. And then there's a short activity for you to do, which will just take you towards writing some notes, basically, for when you have to do your assignment. So watch the things, do the activity, do the Vark questionnaire, and then complete the activity on learning styles and upload that before you move on to part 2.